stuff in tubes. Stuff in tubes is this kind of thing. We all know these mastics, fillers, caulking, all kinds of things. You get yourself a gun, and I would suggest you get yourself a good gun because the cheap ones are horrible to use. Maybe something like a Caulk gun, well worth the investment. When you go into a merchant's or a DIY store or wherever you go, you're treated to a vast range of different products, all in tubes, all looking lovely. And if you're anything like me, bit of a skinflint basically, you'll look at these tubes and you'll go, price, price, price. Bit like buying a bottle of wine in a restaurant. You'll price, price, price. Where's the cheap stuff? Now, the cheap stuff is 99p a tube, and it's called Decorators Cork, and it's an acrylic based product that's useful for filling in around skirtings, architraves, all that kind of thing, where things are a bit gappy just before you paint. Beautiful product, can be over painted, and you can actually use it outside as well if you paint it. But it's not great outside, so really cheap product that's good for those jobs. Stick to using it inside, you'll be fine. Actually, within that range, there are some which are a little bit better. The Dunlop one I found has got a little bit more elasticity in it, will allow for a little bit more movement, whereas some of the others can just tear apart if things start to move too much. But hopefully things don't start to move too much. So that's the first one we're talking about, is the Decorators Cork. You want to move outside, you want to do something a little bit more demanding, maybe a ceiling around window frames and things like that. So here you've got a choice between silicone and hybrid polymers. Now, if you use a silicone, people tend to think that silicones is the go-to product for sealing everything up, wonderful product. But you've got a division within the silicones, and you've got neutral curing, and you also got the stuff with acetic acid, acetol in it, which is basically the stuff which smells a little bit, well, you know, really quite pungent, a bit more than vinegar, I'd say. But anyway, you'd know as soon as you use it, you get that smell, goes in your eyes slightly, a little bit irritating, but it does the job. That acetic acid is a wonderful product. It's good for doing certain sealing jobs, but what it isn't good for is using on things like stone, natural stone, metal, and even PVC frames. So if you've got double glazing, you want to go round and seal all that. The stuff with the acetic acid in is not great for doing that. The other subdivision here, so we've got acetoxy, and we've also got neutral curing. And neutral curing is the other product that is suitable for use on stone, because basically instead of having that acetoxy inside it and giving off acetic acid, it just gives off kind of alcohol. You won't smell it, and it doesn't attack those various things like around, say, if you putting the nice trimming around the shower, maybe it's a bit of chrome or something like that, then the stuff with the acetoxy will discolour that fairly quickly and attack it, whereas the neutral curing won't. So why not use neutral curing all the time, you might wonder? Well, it's just a question of how quickly they cure and how quickly you want to get away, really. Okay, so the other thing we need to know about silicones is that they're good on non-porous type materials like glass and tiles and so on. They're not very good on porous materials. So if you've got something like timber or you've got plaster, then a silicone really isn't a very good choice for that sort of thing. You really need to be looking down around the hybrid polymers and things like that. The other thing that you need to remember with silicones is that they cure on contact with moisture in the air. Basically that's what stops them. Then they're not curing with evaporation. Now that's important really, because silicones are more or less, if you get a good silicone, and I say a good silicone where you're paying maybe about £4 a tube for it, then it's probably 100% of silicone product in it. But a lot of the cheaper ones have got fillers in them, so you get them for £1.99 a tube. You think, oh, that's a bargain, I'll get a bit of that, and it's fine, you can use it, no problem with that. But what you've got there is something slightly different, and the curing process is slightly different, and maybe the life expectancy is also a little bit less. You get what you pay for, I guess. Now when we look at hybrid polymers, we're looking at things like HB42 and CT1, to name but two of them, and there's a whole load of other ones which I suspect are really probably even coming out of the same factory, very similar products. But one thing you will notice is that they cost around about somewhere between 7 and 9 quid a tube. You can pay a bit more than that obviously, but if you go for that as a target price, now you think, okay, that's a lot of money, I'll go and buy some of that cheap silicone. But the hybrid polymers do a lot more. They're very good at sticking to themselves, in other words the cohesion. They also are very good at sticking to all those other surfaces. So when you start reading the list of things that they can stick to, they can stick to metal, they can stick to glass, stick to tile, stick to wood, stick to stone, stick to brick, and stick to you if you like. So a great product, costs a bit more, got very, very good flexibility. In fact, my camper van is more or less, the whole thing is stuck together with that hybrid polymer, and that gets moved around, driven all over the place, and fingers crossed, touch wood, so far hasn't leaked. So just shows you a product like that is really, really good, highly engineered product. Going to cost a bit more because they're not putting cheap rubbish in it. So again, like I say, get what you pay for. So this is the general theme of this, I guess. And another thing to remember about hybrid polymers is that they don't shrink. Whereas when you look at things like Decorators Cork, for example, you could be talking about 60% solids, 40% water. So that's why they're cheap, because basically they're selling you water and a few fillers and other things. So when they dry, they evaporate and they cure, and that means you're losing 40% of the body of that thing straight away, which can make a really big difference. Whereas a hybrid polymer, no shrink, stays where it's put, and it still gives you that flexibility. And it's also UV stable, which is a very important thing. In the silicone, we have high modulus and low modulus. So not only have we got to worry about whether they're acetoxy or neutral curing, but we've also got to worry about whether they're high modulus or low modulus. Now, what does this mean? Well, high modulus really means that it takes a high degree of force to stretch it, so it's a lot stronger. So if you imagine something where it was really difficult to stretch, you'd call that a high modulus of elasticity. Whereas when it's a low modulus of elasticity, you can just stretch it backwards and forwards very easily, but it will tend to break, obviously. So if you're sealing something round a bath or something like that, where there's going to be a little bit of movement, when the water goes in, it might just settle down slightly. When you stick a 20 stone person in there, it might settle down a little bit more, and you need something with a high modulus of elasticity. In other words, strong as old boots. And in the silicone category, you can also get food safe silicones. So if you're doing something around the food preparation area, you might like to think about that. And if you're sticking together an aquarium, you definitely need something that is fish safe. But the sensible thing to do there would be to go and buy it from your fish supplier or whoever you buy your aquariums from. Aquaria? I don't know. Those acetoxy silicones are not great on things like lead flashing because it tends to eat into those. Again, I would be looking for something like a specific purpose-made lead flashing sealant, as opposed to just going and getting yourself anything that you think might do the job. The problem is with all these things is that we go in there, we buy something cheap, and a few months later we've got to redo the job. So it turns out to be a rather expensive product rather than a cheap product. Most of these products I've been talking about are not solvent based, but when we talk about solvent based products, there used to be the good old standby was grip fill, which kind of went off in a very, very short time, and that meant that if you wanted a grab adhesive, you wanted something just you were putting a panel or sticking a batten up on the wall or something like that, you would just run a bit of the grip fill down, press it against the wall, pull it away again for a couple of seconds, and let that, what we call, flash off, maybe 10 seconds, and then when you stuck it back on, you got an instant grab of adhesive and it would stay there. Some of these other adhesives have got that grab ability. In particular, hybrid polymers are pretty good at that, and as Robin Clevitt showed a few weeks ago, one of the things that you can do with a sealant, any kind of adhesive, is to, as you put the two surfaces together, just move them up and down a little bit, work them a little bit, because actually you get better adhesion when you have a thin film on there rather than a thick film. So surprising that, but I've stuck things like shower profiles onto tiled walls because we didn't want to screw into the tiles because we didn't know what was there. We just used to use a bead of silicone down the back, a neutral curing one, and then press it against the wall, rub it a little bit, and then leave it. And honestly, if you tried to get that off the next day, you'd have to use a very, very sharp blade or a saw blade to actually cut the thing off the wall. So they can do a tremendous job with learning to trust these things. The old-fashioned guys like me probably still prefer to put a couple of screws in here and there just to hold things, but really these adhesives and these silicones and things like grip fill work tremendously well. The one thing to remember about polyurethane adhesives is that they are not UV resistant, so you'd have to cover them up. If you're using those outdoors, especially things like the expanding foam and all those, then you really need to protect them from the UV, from the sunlight, otherwise they will just degrade. Let's not forget mold and mildew resistant, because you see on a lot of the silicone sealants and other sealants you say will not support mold growth, and you think, oh, that's wonderful, it's exactly what I want, because I don't want all that dirty old black ugly mold around my shower. And then of course you put it on and 6 months later you find you've got the black mold. So you say, what happened to all that mold resistance? Well, in actual fact it's a little bit of a get out here, because the product itself will not support mold growth, but what does support mold growth is all the junk that you leave on there. So when you have a shower, a lot of the time you just have a quick rinse down, maybe just use a little bit of a spray, biocidal spray, to get rid of anything that's lingering there, and maybe even just wipe round the joints. A lot of palaver to go to when you're in a rush to get to work in the morning, but somebody's got to do it at some time, because if you leave all that skin and all that other junk that you've washed off your body to sit on that silicone, that will support mold growth. Because although the product is mildew resistant, we're not. I'm not, for sure. And just a little tip, if I can give you one, about sealing surfaces with silicone. If you've got a wall coming down here and you've got a surface like the edge of a bath or a shower, something like that, that you want it. Now, if there's no movement there, don't worry about it. But if there is movement, then you need to stick to that surface and that surface, but not that surface. Because if you stick to three surfaces, it will tear. In other words, all that lovely high modulus won't have a chance to work, because it won't have anywhere to stretch. You've pinned it in too many places. So the idea is, just to exaggerate this, try and get it across the back, across there, but put some kind of filler. Now, if you're doing things like window frames, for example, you can buy this filler rod, which is just a sponge rod that you poke into the joint first, and that also saves you a lot of sealant if you do that. And you just poke that into the joint first, and then you find that when you put the silicone over the top, it's not sticking to that corner, it's just sticking around that very flexible bit of sponge. So I hope that helps. I hope you found that useful. That's a quick flash through, if you like, in the silicone and sealant department, but hopefully it'll save you money and stop you making a mistake or two. I'm Roger Bisbee. Come back and see us again on Skill Builder sometime. We've got more fun coming up. Do you remember fun? Oh yeah.